Hello all, this is a male space, and today I have with me Lamprey Milt of MGTOW Chats and the author and political scientist, Dr. Stephen Baskerville. I've been discussing Dr. Baskerville's works in my videos, as you can all have heard, and he is the author of four books that have influenced me and had a great impact on me. He is the author of The New Politics of Sex, Sexual Revolution, Civil Liberties, and the Growth of Governmental Power, Taken into Custody, The War Against Fathers, Marriage, and the Family, The Gentleman's Guide to Manners, Sex, and Ruling the World, How to Survive as a Man in the Age of Misandry and Do So with Grace, and also Who Lost America? Why the United States Went Communist and What to Do About It. Now, today we're going to be discussing the politics of sex, and we're going to be drawing from the content in the book, both books actually, because there's some overlap here, with The New Politics of Sex and Who Lost America. And now I want to establish first that this sexual revolution that we are still in is a political revolution implemented and enforced by government power. And it has shaped culture to a large degree. So, with that said, can you, let's say, succinctly explain how conservatives do not understand this ideology, this sexual ideology that seems to be permeating all facets of our life and our institutions, including law, that is the legal system, the military, the welfare state, the family unit, marriage, you name it. It seems to have penetrated all the important aspects of life, even including religious institutions. So, can you drive that home of how this is a political revolution? Because many people think, and I've seen some interactions with you on X and other social media in which people just simply talk about culture, that this was a cultural shift, which it was. But as you've explained in your books and in your writings, that it is a cultural revolution that is only, perhaps correctly or incorrectly stated for me, is that it can only occur with law or the removals of law or alterations in law. Meaning we could have not had this revolution without the legal enforcement of it. Can you describe that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as you say, many people, the term sexual revolution conjures up in many people's minds the cultural freedoms of the 1960s, the mini skirts, the Woodstock Festival, hippies naked in the mud, the free love, and all of that. And even today, some of that is romanticized and treated like, a lot of innocuous, innocuous pleasure, kind of silly, but not hurting anybody. But the sexual revolution did quickly turn political. You got the advent of feminist ideology coming in and creating new rules, basically promoting the sexual freedoms, promoting free love, promoting promiscuous sex, out of wedlock sex, and all this. The feminists did a great job of popularizing the revolution by this promise of sexual freedom, much as all revolutions do. The French Revolution promised the rights of man and the citizen. So the initial promise was freedom, but increasingly the feminists came to codify their own rules, and they created a new ideology, I believe. Now, that ideology came out of the left. It came out of Marxism and earlier forms of leftist ideology, but it's really a new ideology. It is really something quite remarkable and needs to be considered in its own terms. If you look back at the history of revolutions and ideologies in the modern world, the feminists emerged early on in the French Revolution, in the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, but they were always in the margins. They were always, pushed aside by Lenin and the others even. But now in the 20th century America and the West, they really emerged to enjoy their own day in the sun. And so this needs to be understood and taken seriously on its own terms. And that's what the conservatives haven't done. They want to treat it as just another resurgence of Marxism in new form. This thing you hear all the time in the U.S., especially this refrain of cultural Marxism. This is cultural Marxism, and it's very. I know the man. I think I know the man that coined that phrase, Bill Lind, a military strategist. It's a very useful term. It's a very valid term. Because there is some truth. It did come out of it, just like all leftist ideologies come out of what comes before. But the left has this power to reinvent itself. And it's really, with the end of the Cold War, with the end of communism as a serious, and the Soviet Union as a serious threat, the left jettisoned doctrinaire Marxism. And that's really what pushed feminism to the top, to the forefront, to the vanguard of the left. And the right, and the reason they're so successful is that the right doesn't want to face this. They don't, as you say, they don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. They're afraid of it. They've never taken it seriously on its own terms. They even collaborate with it quite shamelessly sometimes. And I can elaborate on that. But that's the basic nutshell, is that we haven't, and it's true, what's true of the right, the organized right, is true of all of us. I think many of us see it still as this innocuous, rock and roll and mini skirts and stuff. But it's much more. I've written, as you pointed out very kindly, I've written 4 books on the topic and many articles, including peer-reviewed articles in academic journals. And every day I discover things about it that I hadn't thought of before. So, it's really worth serious examination.
Yes, and
Let me interject here. I like to know more about this collaboration regarding I guess, your so-called trad cons working in tandem with feminism. If you Because you said you could elaborate a little bit more on it. I'm curious to hear what your take is.
Well, the most recent one, this is going on right now, where it's at the height of its influence. For example, when the feminists go on about, all this controversy about washrooms, about public toilets and restaurants, this and other female space. Now, I agree. Transgender people should not, transgender males should not be allowed in ladies' washrooms. That's fine. But the other one, what gets far more attention are feminist bastions like women's sports. And women's sports is I agree, it's wrong that men shouldn't be allowed to compete in women's sports. It's kind of ludicrous, males. But the feminist, women's sports is a bastion of radical feminism. And here they are, they want to pull up the ladder, having liverated themselves in this way. But in fact, it was feminists who introduced this idea that sex, to be blunt, or now as they say, gender, is a social construct. It's malleable. It's not real. It's socially constructed. And so when the transgenderists, the cross-dressers, press this to its logical conclusion and demand entry into washrooms and women's sports, the feminists, want no part of it. They don't want make-believe women, understandably, to a point. But they invented these notions, and then the conservatives, the trad cons, back them on this. They love to wheel the feminists on stage and fight their battles for them.
Right.
So if the feminists object to the transgenderists, let's invite the feminists onto the show, and she can bash us all for our sexism and misogyny and so forth, and then at the end she'll complain about the transgenderists. In other words,
So it's a bit of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but you're forgetting the fact that it's still your enemy. And the to build upon what you just said a little bit further, it seems it's this. I have two. Uh, I have like a fork in the road. It's either feminists are just full of contradictions and they're not too sure about what direction they should be taking things in, or that feminism has always been at the mudsill of it is to erode the family at the end of the day. So I feel because
precisely.
the transgender thing makes absolutely no sense if you look at it through if you are a feminist, if you're being pragmatic about it. Well, men can't be doing these things, but you see that feminists are like, yeah, men can gender is fluid. Men can use the little girl's bathroom. So it's like, okay, so what is going on there? Is feminism about equal rights, or is it actually more about just eroding the differences between the two sexes?
Right. Exactly. And to push it a little further, what's really pernicious about this is that it drives out conservative principles. In other words, rather than have fixed principles that they stand for and that they're willing to articulate and champion. The feminists invite the conservatives invite the feminists onto the stage to fight their battles for them. Well, they don't. The other one, the more pernicious one, even, is the mutilation of children uh, because of through transgenderism, which is truly horrific. And yet, if you invite now, some feminists object to this, but if you do this, what happens? Well, first of all, it's ignored to a large extent when the Biden administration was pushing it. But even when it's not, the feminists will come on and they will criticize this sort of thing, not in the name of basic moral decency, but they'll criticize it in the name of feminist ideology. So Bill Clinton is not guilty of fornication or cheating on his wife, or adultery. He's guilty of sexual harassment, right? So you invoke the jargon, you invoke the ideological, and you give a pass to the traditional morality. And so this ideology wheedles its way into our brains, into our consciousness. We start thinking in these ideological terms. Oh, Bill Clinton didn't cheat. He didn't commit adultery. He committed sexual harassment.
Right.
And this is, I think this is very pernicious because it means ideology drives out morality. And this is happening over and over again, as if we're supposed to say, what's wrong with the transgenderists is their misogyny. That's what's wrong with them. Not that they mutilate children, right, by unnecessary surgeries, but that they're misogynists.
Yes, thank you for that. And both of you have really driven home the point that this is not just a matter of sexual freedom and having fun a la the 1960s. This is really just changing the fabric of society as a whole. And this is what I think that where I get to a crossroads, a lot of people, for example, when I post online in some forums that I'm active on or just in everyday life, they cannot wrap their head around the sexual revolution going beyond just fun and hedonism. And what I want to point out, and Lamper, you got into this also on our outline here, is that Lamper, being that we're similar in age, did you notice, and Dr. Baskerville, perhaps you did as well, did you notice in the 90s when we were growing up that this sexual imagery and this lewdness was simply all over the place? I mean, people think that it's bad now, but I do remember this flood of movies in the late 80s and 90s and even to the early 2000s that simply almost like exhorted men to be what I would just call perpetual clowns and sexual pigs, for example. Even though these movies were generally funny, they were generally entertaining. I might even watch them again. However, I think you know which ones I'm talking about. Revenge of the Nerds, Hard
No,
Body.
Animal House. Animal House was
Yes,
the first one
yes,
that I
yes,
could think of, and
yes, Animal
my
House, yes.
father loves that movie. I remember watching it with him when I was like, maybe like 12 or 13, and I was just kind of confused, like between, am I supposed to laugh or am I supposed to get out the Vaseline? I'm just it's kind of these, and then later on when I was, right, again when I was about a middle school, American Pie came out. And again, just kind of confused, like, I don't know whether to laugh or, jerk off. And then it wasn't even funny. So I saw this come morbid where we kept, mixing it. My 2 cents of it is that it promotes sexual immaturity. I think Americans are sexually immature when you look at, like, say, the French, the Chinese. My time living in Southeast Asia, there's this immaturity when it comes to sex, because it's still, despite the depravity and pornography and the transgenderism and so on and so forth, we still pearl clutch over sex, which I just find laughable. I don't know if the doctor would agree with me on that. I just felt like my time living abroad, there was much more sexual maturity in other cultures versus the United States.
Well, what I have to add into that also, and then I want to add Dr. Baskerville's opinion and view on this, is that this, for example, this ties into these conservatives, whether they are influencers or actual politicians. They will whine, and like Dr. Baskerville knows, I don't like to have this perpetual whining that men have been doing these days, meaning that, or if men who want to fix problems, such as Elon Musk or Donald Trump, want to fix the birth rate without examining these problems. I mean, they'll say, well, you have to get a higher birth rate. Have they done a thorough examination of what mating and dating is like these days? There seems to be no examination of what we're going to cover in this outline here. How could you correct the society or increase the birth rate without going over what we're going over here? And also, it has to do also with entertainment, because if you have men exhorted to be clowns and exhorted to be immature for their whole lives, basically, actually, then the family unit, I don't think it can function properly, actually. I don't see a birth rate increasing if we're going to be clowns and sexual hedonists. So I think that there's a problem with the obsession with sex. And now I want to get into here also another thing that is seldom examined, the history of it. Both whoever of political persuasion do not examine, and some do actually. I've seen some good content on it. I want to go over the destruction of the family. And as you discussed also, Dr. Baskerville, in Who Lost America, um, I see that the welfare state was the testing ground or just the experiment of sexual revolution to begin with, as we've discussed before, and I would like to get into this also because it's relating to the topic here. So, and it's also what Dr. Daniel Lemnius focused on also, is that the sexual freedom, if I have it right, and you can tell me the real lowdown here, is that if I have it right, is that the sexual revolution and the sexual freedom started in the welfare state because by having the fathers out of the home, and eventually we'll get into the deadbeat dad myth also, is that you have these let's say responsible working men removed from the house, it gave women sexual freedom, and then that sexual freedom moved to the white middle class via no fault divorce. And that's why even Dr. Baskerville has a chapter in his book called Free Like Blacks. And if you could get into, let's say, after you explain this to us, the kind of joint forces between the matriarchal blacks in the slums of our American society with the white feminists who saw these black matriarchs as powerful women to be emulated and to be, yeah, to team up with. Can you give us a lowdown on that?
Well, you've introduced a lot of things here in the last couple of
Yeah.
minutes. But
Yeah.
yeah, okay, let's start with the welfare state, like you mentioned. That actually goes back quite a long way. If you look at the welfare state has been created and expanding all through the 20th century. It was the first achievement of the feminists after they got the vote. One of the first things they did was to create the welfare state. And there's a good article on this by John Lott, who showed that the government power all through the 20th century exploded when women got the vote. And a big reason for that is the welfare state. The welfare state did a lot to degrade the poor. It created a permanent underclass, disproportionately minorities, but also some poor parts of white America, like Appalachia. And it perpetuated the poverty from one generation to another. And one of the main way he did that was by breaking up the family, by exiling the father from the family, and making sure that the benefits of the welfare system went entirely to the mother and to the children. Now, at first, this was not, this gradually developed over the decades, but it also gave enormous amount of power to a couple of sectors of society, both of them female. One was to the social work profession, which was from the very beginning imbued with feminist ideology, sometimes Marxist and anarchist ideology around the turn of the 20th century. Then increasingly over the century, feminist ideology came to dominate the social work profession and turned social workers into basically plainclothes gendarmes, plainclothes police, feminist police, leftist police. And the other people that empowered was, yes, it empowered single mothers. First of all, low-income single mothers in the welfare state, African American largely, but other minorities too, and white ones in Appalachia. Indian reservations was another place. And then that increasingly spread to the middle class, to the middle class with divorce in gradually over the decades, but really the watershed was with the no-fault divorce in the 70s, which the welfare machinery was retooled, reinvented, and expanded greatly to include middle-class families. So all of these police powers that were accruing to feminist social workers, such as child abuse, first of all, domestic violence, and then eventually child support enforcement. All of these began to expand greatly, especially in the 90s. You both mentioned the 90s. When the feminists really began to consolidate and codify their power over the welfare state, over the middle class, over American society. And this was the period also I mentioned when the Cold War had ended. So the left needed a new ideology to sustain it. The old ideology of communism, Marxism, liberalism, concern for the poor, um, went out the window, and the welfare state was no longer even concerned with the poor. The poor were no longer. It was a matter of empowering. Up till this point, everyone had considered the welfare state to be a necessary evil. Liberals, conservatives didn't like it because it was wasteful. Even liberals didn't like it because it was, demeaning to the poor. And Marxists didn't like it because they said it would dampen the revolutionary fervor of the working class. So nobody liked the welfare state. Everyone thought it should be tossed out eventually, but nobody figured out how to do it. Well, in the 90s, after the welfare reform of Bill Clinton, which he superficially reformed, but really he handed a huge amount of more police power to the feminist social workers, and it became this ideology. It became the welfare state was no longer to relieve poverty; it was to empower women, to empower the gendarmes, the social workers, and the single mothers. And I do quote in Who Lost America, I quote white middle class feminists who envy black matriarchs, black lower class welfare queens, because they are the most accomplished, well, not to put too fine an edge on it, they're the most accomplished at throwing the men out of their lives and of the men's families. So the black matriarch becomes the model for the feminist welfare queen. I do quote in both those books a nice quote from a famous feminist socialist Barbara Ehrenreich, very influential in my youth in the 80s. She says, poverty isn't so bad as long as you have sexual freedom.
Yes.
So it's not so bad. We can
Yeah.
live with poverty.
Yeah. I want to point that also. And before I want to ask Lamprey something, before I go into that, I remember also you and Dr. Daniel Naus spoke about the feminists Delma Hain and Barbara Seaman actually exhorting women to cheat on their husbands, to be to have it, commit adultery, promoting this sort of, I guess we could call it freedom. It certainly wrecks the family and marriage. And Lamprey, I was glad upon looking at your addition to this outline here, the mention of Pruitt-Igoe, which was one of the first huge housing projects. I think that was in St. Louis, Kentucky. And actually, like Dr. Baskerville taught me, is that what happened was that these women could not get the welfare unless the men
Yeah.
were residing in the homes. And actually, Dr. Baskerville, just to point out something. When I read Who Lost America, is that when I discuss these matters, I just want to put this in there before Lamprey, you go ahead. Is that I feel that this is, even though this is not, we're living in these times, I'm a middle class man, is that I felt angry about that, meaning that I felt that it was an affront to all of us to just have this system where men are kicked out of their homes to give welfare, and also it seems very sinister to. I mean, who would drum up? I saw a documentary about Cabrini Green, saw a documentary about Pruitt-Igoe, Techwood Homes, all these early housing projects. And even in New York City, we have many of them. We have Queensbridge in Long Island City, which is an enormous housing project, a series of housing projects. So when you think of this, the developers of these, I don't think the architects were in on this, but who would think that you would build these enormous complexes with thousands of people in them and then think, we're going to get these fathers out of the homes, and to think with the architecture of it, plus getting the fathers out of the homes, uh, who would think that this would be a positive result? I mean, this seems almost like whether it was intentional or not, this seems sinister. Lamper, you have anything to say to that?
Oh, well, if for anyone that knows anything about Pruitt-Igoe, it was designed by a Japanese architect who also designed the first World Trade Center before he was allowed to start doing any type of private work. Before designing the World Trade Center, I should say, the they told I forget his name slips my mind. He actually died not that long ago. They said, "You well, before you do the World Trade Center, you have to design residential the for the federal government." And it was I believe to this day the largest public assisted housing complex ever built in the United States. When it was torn down less than a decade later, looking back on it, revisiting it, they asked him what happened with Pruitt-Igoe, and he says, "I never thought in my life human beings could act in such a manner." and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he was just blown away by how short-lived Pruitt-Igoe was. He designed this kind of like a utopia. It was had baseball parks. It was supposed to have a swimming pool, but I think it was about 7 years later it was torn down. Uh, Funny you mentioned the documentary. I'm assuming we both watched the same documentary. The rule was that a man cannot be seen inside the apartment. The men would sneak back 1, 2 o'clock at night to go be with their families, and then have to leave before 5 o'clock in the morning. Because if there was a male to be seen inside the unit, they would lose their stipend, their they wouldn't be on the dole, so to speak, and they would perhaps be thrown out of the housing development. I mean, there was some other factors involved with Pruitt-Igoe just because of what was going on with the economy at that time, but the main driving point of that documentary was that there was no men to be allowed in that housing development during its early years, I should say.
Yes, that's what I learned, and I'm glad that you pointed out actually. And as Dr. Baskerville explained to me also in his books and also in our our other conversation. And another what I want to go over here also is in relation to that is that Dr. Baskerville, did this kind of segue into the deadbeat dad myth, meaning that these men were already removed from the homes? And was there like a switch here, meaning that first you get the man out of the home, and then you're going to tell the man that's out of the home he's a deadbeat dad? Is that how this flipped?
Excuse me, yes, but it happened slowly. The whole time I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was none of this vilification of men because it was just accepted that this would happen, and everybody thought it was bad. Daniel Patrick Moynihan issued his famous report in 1965 saying this was bad. Everyone thought it was bad, but nobody could figure out a way to deal with it. And people basically dealt with it by expanding the roles and coughing up the money for it. It was really, again, in the 90s that this started. And I think it happened for several reasons. Again, the ideological need, changes of America, but also it became untenable. It became economically untenable to keep paying for this. So somebody got the idea that we should start squeezing the men, the fathers, for the money. The taxpayers shouldn't be paying all this. Where are the men? And this was the basis of Bill Clinton's 1996 welfare reform bill. Has an awkward name, but it was 96. And it was, in theory, Clinton came in marketing himself as a moderate. He was going to, reform welfare. This was very popular with conservatives. He basically brought in the conservatives. He got more pushback from the liberals than he did from the conservatives, but everyone fell behind this. Everyone, that is, but the fathers, because the idea was he did modestly reduce the welfare levels, but apparently, I think they just increased again with Obama back up to where they were. But what he did do was he transferred these police powers to the social workers, and that's when he made these speeches against deadbeat dads. And the media joined in, and other politicians joined in. And it was in the 90s when they started figuring we need to put the squeeze on the fathers, that this vicious, absolutely vicious campaign against fathers who had been, most of them had been involuntarily divorced and thrown out of their family. And it was also during this time that more and more middle-class fathers were being pulled into the system. That ideologically feminism was taking control of the left. So it all dovetailed together in the 1990s. And that's when and also you started getting these accusations about politicians on the higher level, of domestic violence. Child abuse accusations were older, but they were becoming less popular and more into domestic violence became the favorite accusation. And then that was coupled with deadbeat dads and non-payment of child support. So it was really accelerated during that time.
Yes. And before we actually get into it, because I want to cover the divorce regime soon into this conversation, but before we go into that, do you think that some people, maybe a lot of people, do they underestimate the consequences of fatherlessness? I think that some people take a flippant view on this and really do not understand the scope of the negative consequences of fatherlessness. And you and I, actually, the title of our other video was The Fatherless Crisis. And me being someone from a father that was, for all practical purposes, absent and negligent, which caused problems for my household, do you think that people underestimate it? Because that's what I've seen, actually. I'm not sure if you saw that, but what do you think?
Well, that's interesting. I would be interested in, I stand to be corrected, but because I've been studying this now for 25 years. And it's not my main frustration. My main frustration is um, getting people to understand the causes of it. For
Yes.
example, when I got into this in the late 90s, into this subject, there was quite a lot of discussion of fatherlessness among the mainstream politicians. After all, it was Bill Clinton and Al Gore who started a presidential task force on what it was called, responsible fatherhood, and Bush came after and did that. And you get these books in the 90s, David Blankenhorn's book, Fatherless America, and what was it? David Popenoe wrote a book called Life Without Father. And I found that Republicans, even as far back as then, the 90s, were talking a lot about fatherlessness. They were going on and on about how destructive it was. There was a lot of social science being marshaled to show. There was the National Fatherhood Initiative, which is a organization. Wade Horn was head of it, but there were others pushing it. And there was quite a lot of attempts in the mainstream right, especially, and even the mainstream center left, to push fatherlessness. Now, there was some pushback from the Marxists, the feminists, who said, no, it's just low income. If these people are poor, it's not fatherlessness. Just give them more money and everything will be okay. But that was debunked pretty easily, that argument. Blankenhorn debunked that and showed that it wasn't just low income that was hurting children. It was actually the father, and that middle class kids did worse if they didn't have a father than low income kids did if they did have a father. So, but what I find is frustrating is then getting the conservatives to make the next leap of logic and say, well, then where does this come from? Fathers don't just disappear. It just happened. And if, in those days, if pressed, they would say, well, the fathers are abandoning their children. They're just abandoning them. Even President Bush said this. The fathers are absconding. They're just running away. And there's not a shred of evidence to show this at all whatsoever. And increasingly, the men knew that this was not true. They were being hauled into court and stripped of their children in family court or divorce court. And they hadn't done anything legally wrong, and they hadn't consented to any divorce, and they wanted to be good fathers, and they weren't permitted by the judges. And here the Republicans running around saying, oh, these fathers have abandoned their children. Donna Shalala was head of child support enforcement, and she said something like 17 million children have been economically abandoned by their fathers, is the way she put it, economically abandoned. And what she meant was the fathers were on the child support rolls. They were being squeezed for child support. It didn't mean they'd abandoned anybody. It just means their names are on the federal list.
Yes.
And this is madness. This is madness.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that explanation. And Lamprey, I want to ask you about this, something that you added to this topic. Right here, you said that blacks lash out, whites withdraw. What do you mean by that?
Oh, the kind of the whole 13th grade neat phenomenon where it's not necessarily so much to do with the situation between men and women. It's that men, air quote, white men, they tend to they self-depreciate, they internalize their problems. They're not addressing the problems as a whole, as a societal problem. They think it's a them problem, whereas the a black man would kind of twist it and say it's the system, Whitey's got me down, so on and so forth.
I see what you mean. Because, I mean, when I was growing up back in the 90s, early 2000s, late 80s also, is that what I saw in my communities and the ones surrounding is that some of the young white men would lash out as well in terms of, let's say, gang membership and violence. And Dr. Daniel Onea said also related to this single motherhood problem is that he said, a quote that I remember from it, he said that male violence and female promiscuity are Siamese twins. When fatherless people, when they're if they are females tend to establish their identity about around promiscuity, and the males become violent. And I would think that that actually summarized what I observed in the early '90s, and even in the middle class. So when people say, my view is this. I spent much time in Black communities, all kinds of communities in my work, and also my recreational life. Is that the same pathologies were creeping up into the white middle class in the '90s and early 2000s. I mean, not to the same degree, but they were there also. But I think that people have a misconception of, let's say, they think that these problems are only located in lower class communities, but I do not. Well, I know that they don't. Maybe now they don't, but back then they did. And now I want to go forward with here also is that you mentioned in the new politics of sex, you had a section on daycare, and it is a means of expanding governmental power. Now, this has become, uh, I'm not sure how many couples have their children in daycare, but daycare is more popular now. I mean, obviously, it's used more now than in the past when I was young. So, how is this used as a means of expanding governmental power? And also, Lamper, you also brought this up in the outline as well. I want you to comment on this as well. The dual income household went from being optional to being necessary.
Mhm.
And this has to do with daycare also. Let's say a
Oh,
man.
it's between $1,500 and $2,000 a month in the state of New York. Just to give you a kind of a so it's basically a rental a one bedroom apartment rental payment is the cost of putting a child into or the pre-kindergarten. Let's just say a 2 or 3 year old when the child should not be it should be a child should be with its mother at that age, not with 30 other 2 or 3 year olds. Um,
Yes,
but anyway,
right, but people see that it might be actually a necessity to some couples now because if there's both the man and the woman are working, it might be no other option to get through the day and to run a family. And now, Dr. Baskerville, how is this a means of expanding governmental power?
Well, the daycare, in some contexts, daycare is a very high feminist priority. It has been in the past, and I think it still is. You especially find this in international forums. The United Nations is where daycare is very high, very high priority, and pushed on countries where women often don't work and where they do raise their children as a way of getting women out of the home intentionally, away from the children, and institutionalizing the children. Now, in the Western world, of course, daycare is kind of as you say, it's a necessity for if you want the mother to work, if the mother wants to work, or if you want her to work, whether she wants to or not, then daycare is necessary, I suppose, so to speak. Um, and it does permit women to work. When women work, of course, men's wages go down. So it becomes a I don't know, self-fulfilling problem because it only becomes nowadays, as you say, the man and the woman have to work, but they only do this because the feminists flooded the workplace with extra workers, female workers who drove down the wages of men. So that's but more than that is daycare is being pushed uh, as a way as a form of welfare. It's being pushed as a government obligation. Governments have to provide welfare for at taxpayer expense. And the number of pathologies that arise from daycare has been very well documented. There's a number of studies by Brian Robertson, as I recall, wrote a good book about this some years ago that I quote extensively. And there's a good essay by Bryce Christensen, I think, that I quote in that book about the problems. But what also comes out, which isn't always very well known, is that daycare also becomes a way of indoctrinating children. Daycare is oftentimes dominated by feminists, feminist ideology, and it becomes a way of encouraging. Children in daycare often do have certain pathologies, one of which is extreme rebelliousness. Children, as you say, are housed by low income, poorly paid teenagers to take care of 8, 10, 12 hours a day. often have behavioral problems very early. They become very rebellious. And the feminists have actually said that this could become a good breeding ground for for feminist ideology. They become anti-parents and anti-fathers, and they become very rebellious. So it's a serious problem.
Yes, and it also ties into another institution in which we're having a problem now. Also, are the schools, which are indoctrination camps, so to speak. Lamper, do you have anything to say to that on the indoctrination in the schools?
I don't have children, so I can't necessarily say what it's like for a parent or what a child is learning. I do have a 16-year-old brother, and I do see a little bit of this kind of the bio-Leninism. I think that's what the term is, where kind of these woke ideologies kind of seeping in. Even he goes to private school, mind you. But fortunately for me, I graduated high school right before all of this started transpiring. So I can't necessarily weigh in on what a elementary school student is learning. But I do know that the majority of parents are not taking an inclination on what it is their child is learning. It's two camps. It's either they're nonchalant about it, where they're not looking at their children's books, they're not reviewing any of the chapters that they're studying, whether it be in science or history, or they're much more red pilled, as they say, and they're looking through every text, seeing who the publisher was, and really getting involved in making sure that their child's not being indoctrinated with these type of ideas.
Yes, I mean, my children, I have a son and a daughter. They are homeschooled. They go to a homeschooling, I guess what they call it, pods or co-ops 3 times a week. The rest is done by us, so we don't have that issue. But is there also? I want to delve into this. There's a lot of complaining, and some of it is valid about. Uh, is there an actual discrimination against boys and men in schools? I mean, Lamper, you and I discussed it also. If I recall correctly, you could correct me if I'm wrong. Is that some of the educational material does not speak to men, as we said, or is there, when and women speak about this, is there an actual discrimination in, let's say, either admissions to schools in higher education or the school curriculum in the younger ages are not geared towards boys and towards boys because people say boys are restless, to try to get a boy to sit down for hours with someone lecturing him, they're not inclined to, they're restless. But then again, I guess to play devil's advocate on the flip side, well, how else do you get someone to learn? I mean, if you're
Well,
going to the, yeah, go ahead.
well, well, it was your education upbringing is no different than mine because of where we grew up. So despite the age difference between the two of us, the school system has not what did not change over that decade. Um, Boys were put on Ritalin if they couldn't sit still. This was a kind of a late 80s, early 90s thing where you started getting the introduction to SSRIs and the explosion of ADD, ADHD, OCD, so on and so forth. For me, the exciting part of school was obviously recess and any of like home economics, technology, any of those type of classes where I was looking forward to home economics. I was looking forward to wood shop and tech and so on and so forth. I wasn't necessarily all that thrilled about, I don't know, a math, for example, or even social studies, all the, your basics. I knew they were important at that age, but I was always looking forward to going to any of the technology classes. We're only given 4 terms. So I was only able to take wood shop for maybe about a month or two, home economics for another month or two, and home economics again for another month or two. So it wasn't semesters; there were terms. Um, so that was always disappointing to me. But obviously, history that was the full 9 months. Math, the full 9 months. So yeah, and as far as what you were saying about the differences between men and women go into public education. I think women are much better at rote learning, memorizing certain things. They don't necessarily have, they're not anxiety prone to a pop quiz or testing for that matter. Same thing with what was it? What do we have to take? what was our Regents exams.
Yes,
Funny,
those.
I used to right, I just have like a total meltdown over the Regents exam. I know only New York and California, only two states that have these type of exams, but I'm for it. I think it's a great thing because it shows that you're much more, you're smart versus other states. But yeah, again, I don't necessarily know what it's like anymore for the average middle schooler or high schooler. I'm sure things are much worse now.
Yeah, I agree with that actually. And what we're going to get into here is that this actually leads into this. And also, you being that we're talking about school here, I want to ask Dr. Baskerville before we get into the subject of gender crimes, which is very important, I believe. You have some to say in your books about the term bullying. Is this one of these so-called it's kind of confusing, not confusing to me. I see because I read your books, but for someone listening, I mean, we wouldn't look at bullying as a good thing, but in the way that you mentioned it in your books, is this one of those so-called I mean, I would call it, let's say, a made-up crime that came out of nowhere, in the same way that we've talked about crimes such as staring and stalking. And now people would say, well, you can actually stalk someone, you can actually harass someone. About bullying, what do you have to say about that?
Well, can I just make a point since you introduced education?
Yes.
One
Yeah,
point here,
yeah, please.
and that is something that people, one thing people should focus on much more is what's called sex education or sexuality education. Because many parents already object to this because they don't believe that the schools should be teaching their children about the physiology of sex and sexual technique and this
Health
sort of thing.
class.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
things belong. These things belong in the home. It's for parents to do. It's not part of public education. What they don't realize, though, is that these sex education also contains a large element of political ideology. This came out very strongly in a UN report, which was subsequently withdrawn, but it's still very. This is another issue that's very powerful for the United Nations. But if you look at the literature, children are expected to get the curriculum of sex education often involves things like teaching children about gender roles, and the gender roles are artificial, about teaching children how to engage in political activism and what is, age appropriate, of course. They say age appropriate activism, but things like, reproductive rights and things like this. So it's not just the physical aspects of sex that are being taught. In some ways, I think even more pernicious is indoctrinating children into political ideologies.
Yes.
Now, as for bullying, yeah, this is one we won't think of. It took me a while to really figure this out. Why was bullying such a big? Suddenly, it really took off. I think during the Obama administration, Michelle Obama it became her pet peeve, and she goes on about bullying. And Obama himself confessed to being bullied as a child. Of course, I don't know who wasn't bullied as a child, but never mind. But why is this suddenly such a political issue? Why does the federal government have to become involved in bullying? And so it took me a while to think about it, and other people were thinking about it too. And who was in charge of the bullying? Well, if you looked at it, it was almost entirely the initiative for this, the push, was coming from single mothers, almost entirely. And because after all, when you think about it, who was it that was traditionally in charge of sorting out a bully? Whether it's protecting his son from a bully, or teaching the son how to stand up to a bully, or preventing his son from being a bully to other children. Who would teach a boy about this sort of thing, or a girl? Primarily a father would do this. A father would step in and teach his son that, what the proper response to a bully was. Well, if there's no fathers in the home, where are they going to learn this? How are they going to learn it? Well, they can't. They don't learn. So suddenly they have to be protected by again, public officials have to. And that's why, of course, the bullying comes to be the bullying agenda, the hysteria about bullying comes to be, of course, pushed by single mothers. They're mothers who have to can't deal effectively with one another's children. They find that one another's children are bullying one another. Their children, so because there's no fathers there. So they have to call for federal school officials or federal officials or whatever to step in and do what the fathers should do. And this is the kind of thing that happens all through it. And then to top it all off, the icing on the cake is that the homosexual activists step in and start claiming that bullying is something that uh, heterosexuals do to homosexuals. Bullying, the homosexuals, the transgenderists, and all, they are the victims of bullying at the hands of white children or white adults, for that matter. Or sorry, straight adults or straight children or whatever. So this hysteria multiplies itself and feeds upon itself, and I think that's where we are with that.
Yes, thank you very much for exposing that. It's very useful information. Now, Lamprey, I want to ask you one thing also. Being that we grew up in the same time frame, I think we're a few years apart. Do you think that sexual education backfired? Meaning, there's a trollish blogger, and I think you know who he is. Maybe we could mention his name offline sometime. I don't want to be. My style for talking on YouTube is not too vulgar. However, he did say something profound that I think is true. He said that sexual education were simply just classes for women, for girls, to be SLUTs. Do you think that's true? Because from what I remember about that, I don't remember the political indoctrination that's taking place now. I think that's true, actually. What do you think, Lamprey?
Oh, I, I listen. I graduated high school in '06, 2006. So I'm a fair bit younger than you. Not
Okay.
by that much, but yeah. When I graduated high school, there was a clear demarcation between the sluts and the rest of the girls, and usually the girls that were not sluts used to shame guys that would hook up with the sluts. I remember the word shallow was a popular word, and that was up in the vernacular at the time. Oh, you're shallow. You don't like a girl with personality. You just like that for her to put out. And young women used to shame guys that would pursue women and objectify them. And I think that all kind of changed probably about uh, probably 2012, 2013. I think a lot of young men are seeing that's around the time when things started to shift for the worse for the United States culturally.
Yes.
Again, social media was not that prevalent around that time, but you saw things like the Smith Mundak that was rolled, that was revised into late 2012. Conspiratainment started to take off with Alex Jones with Sandy Hook and stuff. So I do see that around 2012, and then the explosion of social media and Instagram, which kind of was about 4 to 5 years after 2012. That's kind of where I time these things. Like the word shallow doesn't exist anymore. I don't see anyone using, any woman or guy for that matter, using the word shallow. You're being shallow. The movie Shallow Hal, right? That was, again, these were kind of the things that were on people's minds, where you should not be objectifying women in such a manner. But you can see now with feminism, with these contradictions,
Yes.
where you're supposed to idealize. You're not supposed to objectify women, but it's okay for her to be on OnlyFans. Uh, Women can be prostitutes, but men seeking prostitutes should be arrested. So
Yes.
you see all these contradictions where I call it tantalizing cuckoldry, where women are objectifying themselves. You're being bombarded with advertisements. You're being bombarded with pornography. Anywhere you go, you can't get the image of a beautiful woman out of your sight. Marketing and such, as I said. But as soon as you were to approach it or look at a woman, I think in Australia they have what, a 15-second rule. You're not allowed to look at a woman for more than 15 seconds. It's considered sexual harassment. You can get ticketed or arrested or something like that. In England, I don't know if you saw what Mr. A doctor, if you saw in England that they're sending beautiful young women out to go jogging, but in fact they're undercover cops. And if someone were to catcall these joggers who are undercover cops, they would be lectured. And I believe it's a pilot program where eventually they're going to roll it out where you will get a summons or perhaps arrested. So we're seeing all these weird contradictions regarding the realm of sex, and unfortunately, there's no bulwark or there's no opposition to any of this. It used to be the churches, but the churches have I call it a respectful silence when it comes to feminism and all these sexual mores that we're being subjugated to, unfortunately. Again, and guys just withdraw inwards. They're like, you know what? None of this makes any sense. I'm going to sit home. play video games, I'll watch my porn, eat my pizza, and just tune out and drop out.
Yes, thank you for
That was
mentioning.
my rant. That was my rant right there. It was like drinking from a fire hose, but I had to get it out.
No, but that's excellent because this is the next topic in our outline here that I really want to hit home on a lot,
Well,
actually.
well,
But,
I want to see if the doctor has anything to say about what I just laid out, if he can maybe toast it and kind of maybe shed some light on some of the things that I just aired out.
Well, yes, what you said, and briefly, what you said is very reminiscent to me because I grew up in again, the 60s. As a child, I remember the feminists first started talking about, um, you know, objectifying women and how women shouldn't be made into sex objects. And now, as you say, they're quite keen on becoming sex objects. They do everything they can to be sex objects, and it becomes a form of entrapment. What you described in Britain is a form of what we would call entrapment. It becomes a honey trap. And
Right,
that's well, it's just one more example of what I refer to as the unintended consequences of the sexual revolution. This promise of freedom, sexual freedom for everybody, of which men, gladly partook in the early years, indulging in the sexual hedonism and sexual freedom. And then comes the trap is sprung, the authoritarianism comes down, and they suddenly find themselves arrested with this. And this is the main theme that runs through that book, is the sense in which the sexual freedom comes first. It entices everybody in, especially the men, and then the feminists spring the trap, and they find themselves hauled into court for some gender crime. This is still ongoing, and many people still don't realize this.
yes, yeah, thank you both for that. Now, even to expand on that, we see the other transgressions that are, well, they're not real transgressions, I don't believe, such as, well, I'm being a little repetitive here, and we've even had some men, let's say, have sexual relations with women on college campuses, and their academic careers have been ruined after there was consensual activity, though, meaning that they get into these problems. But you see, I don't think no innocent person deserves to be punished. I mean, that's what innocence is. If you're innocent, you don't deserve to be punishment. You don't deserve to be punished. But what I've noticed, I'm not sure if you both, that if I believe that a lot of this does result, despite an innocent person not being worthy of punishment, that there is from the sexual revolution, there is this shutdown of, let's say, discrimination with who one has sex with, meaning that it's simply a free for all. Meaning that, Lambert, I'm sure you're familiar with this term cold approach. Well, cold approach was not a thing in the past. These sorts of liberties to do whatever you want, to have sex with whoever you want. I mean, this is something that men fell for. They don't deserve to be punished, I believe, if there's consent, but men keep falling for this. I mean, there are men who are very promiscuous, and then after some time down this road of hedonism, there are false accusations put upon them. But then again, if you go to, let's say, mention of, let's say, more traditional means of people pairing up, such as courting, matchmaking, softly arranged marriage, people look at someone who mentions these former codes of conduct or former ways of people getting together. You're looked at as a prude. You're looked at as a Puritan. You're looked at as old-fashioned. But how would we correct this? And at the end of this conversation, I want to talk about some conclusions and corrections. That how else would we correct this unless we do have sexual morality introduced again? Because that's not a popular thing, actually. But there's all this whining about female antisocial behavior, but the men indulge also.
Well, what you first mentioned is kind of a question I have for the doctor. So go a little bit, going back to the contradictions where, hey, you can look, but you better not touch. At the very top, do the kind of this managerial class, the people that set policy, do they not see the contradictions in what they're rolling out, or do you think they're ideologues and it's a deliberate form of subversion?
I think they see it, and I think they're cowards. Basically, I think most of them are just cowards.
So
They're
I
they're
get paid and
terrified of.
let me get my paycheck. Yeah, I know it's full of contradictions and sure it's gonna harm society as a whole, but I got mine. I'm just walking away. Is that more or less what you believe it is? I mean, if they're cowards, obviously their fear is of losing their job, and they probably can't. Once they're kind of blackballed, they're the black sheep. They can't necessarily find another job in a college campus or in some type of think tank. Is that what you think it is?
Well, that's a big part of it. Yes, of course, people who are in law enforcement professions, it can build their career. Prosecutors, for example, can it's a blessing for them. They can build their careers by putting people in. That's what their job is, and that reinforces a trend in the law that is actually larger than all of this, which is the criminalization of innocent people, and that goes beyond just gender issues, although I believe the gender issues, gender crimes are the vanguard of that, the spearhead. I think they're the biggest single reason that innocent people are punished in the law. But there's other reasons too. So no, this is a very very concerning phenomenon. Absolutely.
Oh, I've seen so countless videos over since me doing these live streams and just learning more and more about these topics. The amount of men that were shot and killed on their own property because their wives called the cops on them is astounding, horrifying, to say the least. I'm not gonna get into it, but I could name 4 or 5 cases over the past few years of men just he did something totally no proof whatsoever other than her calling saying he's abusing me. The cops show up and they just gun him down and kill him because he's holding a butter knife or something like that 20 feet away. It blows my mind away. And I'm
Well,
sorry. I'm sorry for getting off topic a little bit. I know we wanted to get into what we were gonna some of those questions proposed, but I just wanted to say that look, there's some serious underlying issues that don't we seem to not we're kind of rudderless right now, and go on, Bradley. What were the what were you saying earlier about how do we get back on the right track with these things that were considered prude or square or tradconish?
Yeah, well, I think that we could possibly cover that in the solutions section of this when we wrap it up. But perhaps I'll go back to that actually, because that's a whole other topic in itself, and I kind of
Right.
I derailed myself, so to speak. But I want to get back into this. Is that so? Um, you mentioned also. I remember I was skimming your book, "The New Politics of Sex," Dr. Baskerville, before this talk about Friday night. I was browsing through it. This notion of rights, meaning the right to this, the right to that, and then I think, if I recall correctly, that uh, once these people who assert these new rights or demand these new rights start to inflict punishment or ridicule on the people who oppose them, I mean, introduce these rights, meaning the right to appear, let's say, like you said, I think you mentioned before, the public breastfeeding, or to appear partly or almost nearly nude in public, and then when people object to this, well, it's more like, take it and shove it. I'm running society now. I'm running the show. You put up with what I want to do. Is that what you were going through in your book, The New Politics of Sex? The topic of rights?
Uh, There's some of that, yes. There is, as you say, and as conservatives often lament, there is this proliferation of new kinds of rights everywhere, which is controversial in itself. But what's especially, I think, concerning is when the new rights come to displace the old rights. In other words, the basic rights, like freedom of speech, or due process of law. These rights come to be abrogated or displaced by the new rights. I mean, my breastfeeding is kind of a homely example, but it's kind of a microcosm of what's happening larger in our society, and it's something that people don't notice. Like on the one hand, women, feminists, and others have claimed the right to publicly breastfeed, which I have no objection to. I grew up in a liberal environment, and I have no problems with women breastfeeding in public. I don't think there should be necessarily. So okay, arguably, let's remove the laws against women breastfeeding in public. But other people do object, and so then instead of just allowing the women to breastfeed in public, they start passing laws which punish people who say anything to the women, to the women who object to say anything to the women who are breastfeeding. In other words, it's not just a libertarian law. It's not just allowing women to breastfeed in public, which I would go along with. It's a law to punish people who don't like you breastfeeding in
Yeah,
public, even
right.
if they're just even if they're just expressing their opinion, which after all they have a right to do. So, this is just a tiny kind of homely little example of how the feminists, on the one hand, they promise a freedom, but then they go further and implement a punishment. And
Yes,
it's not just libertarian; it's authoritarian.
yes,
And this happens across the board. The right to engage in extramarital sex becomes an accusation of rape in the
yes.
morning. The right to express yourself about sexual matters becomes a sexual harassment accusation or charge. So every time there's a sexual freedom, there's some corollary punishment that comes along with it, and that's why the sexual revolution was not just a liberation. In some ways, it was a system of repression.
Yes, and also I want to fit in here also a recommendation to any listeners, the book Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control by E. Michael Jones, where he really dives into how this becomes a tyranny and how far back this is going. I think he goes back to Marquis de Sade and those names, all this sexual revolution going back all the way to the 1700s. And with that said, also about these codes of conduct in public and also people being, I guess, annoyed or punished for expressing their dismay at it. Lamper, you mentioned here in the outline, you mentioned a Nike Worldwide. What do you say about that?
Oh, just the proliferation of multinational corporations. That there's no longer class distinctions that you had seen maybe 50, 60, or 100 years ago. It seems that everyone wears Nikes now. Everyone has maybe a Puma shirt. Everyone has an Apple phone. While
Yes.
living in Southeast Asia, you can see class distinctions by the type of cell phone people would be carrying. So a cell phone was a clear indicator of where they are as far as their social standing is concerned. If they have money or if they don't, if they're working class, if they're working in office and stuff, and so on and so forth. So a billionaire won't necessarily have a clothing preference that doesn't differ from someone who's living in a public housing. He may have a nice watch. He'll be rocking maybe a $20,000, $30,000 watch, but his shoes are no different than that person living in public housing.
Oh, I see what you mean by that. Yeah, thank you for that. And this section about gender crimes also, I want to go into this streak of false accusations that seem to me, I mean, maybe I don't pay attention to the news enough through all these years. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Uh, However, this seemed to me, growing up in my life, just seemed to come out of. Did it come out of nowhere? Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but then in the past decade or so, maybe even 15 years, this run of allegations from 10 to 20, I think if I'm not mistaken, going 15 years back, 20 years back, 30 years back. I mean, well, long ago, and just all these people with some of these names, Kavanaugh, Cuomo, Trump, Cosby, and now who recently got in trouble, the football player Shannon Sharp. Now, I'm not saying everybody in these situations are darlings and the most ethical or moral people, but they seem to come out of, in my lifetime, uh, out of nowhere. I mean, how does this happen? Every rich.
Yeah, that's again going back to what I said earlier about sexual maturity. And me and you both coming from New York, the Cuomo sexual, the love gov. Where he's a single guy. He's a single man. He's older. He's well established. He's powerful. He's good looking. I know a lot of women that find him very attractive. Same thing for his brother Chris. And for him to be brought down by an absolute Me Too hysteria is laughable. Not for the fact that you shut down. You force elderly people with COVID into nursing homes. No, no, no. That's not what you're going to get in trouble for. You're going to get in trouble for hitting on an intern who you didn't even have relations with, for that matter, because you hugged someone. Uh, any rational society, and for the overwhelming majority of the world, would scoff at this and ask what's really behind this persecution. No, but we're supposed to just take this at face value, and he's being a man, bring him down, and then for Cuomo to accept that as his downfall, uh, lets us know that there was more to that story. Um, yeah, but it's baffling. If Doctor, if you want to take it away.
Well, I, excuse me, I think that a big part of it comes from the family courts. Because if your aim is to get rid of a man that you don't want, if a man is causing trouble, like your child's father, then the feminists found very early on that accusations, first of child abuse and later of domestic violence, is a
Right.
very effective way of getting rid of an unwanted man. Who's, if you look at how they're adjudicated, most men accused of domestic violence, first of all, they're all punished. Everyone, nobody ever is exonerated. Now, the punishment may not be that severe. But it usually involves getting him out of the house. He may not go to prison. He'll probably be removed from the home, spend a weekend in jail, and then he'll be homeless. He'll have to find someplace else, and the woman gets custody of the children. Well, this is spectacularly successful. I mean, this is amazing. It's a silver bullet, as one lawyer calls it. And I think the feminists found out that this was so successful and so easy to do that one, if you want to get rid of unwanted men in the home, great. But what if you want to get rid of unwanted male politicians? Why not do the same thing? And I think that's basically where the Me Too phenomenon came from, is that they found that, whether it's in the home or in the Congress or on the Supreme Court, if you want to get rid of a man and replace him with a woman with authority, then an accusation of some kind of sexual transgression is perfect. First of all, only men can commit sexual transgressions for the most part, at least in the
Right.
law.
Right.
Um, and I think they found basically the same thing, with rape accusations. It's interesting that you mentioned that rape accusations in the universities seem to have come from nowhere. I think you're right about that. When I was an undergraduate student in the late 70s, feminism was on the rise. It was everywhere. It was great. And there was always, about once a term, there would be a rumor, some poor woman was raped last week. Some poor woman was raped. Nobody questioned this. Everybody assumed that a woman was raped. And so the assumption, though, was that it was someone from the town. It was one of the town versus gown thing. It was some creep from the town had raped a woman. So they set up all these, escort services. And I volunteered once or twice to, walk women home in the evening after a film or after a play. And, everybody, it just wheedled its way into the culture that way. It was since then, since I left my university days, that it gradually became, accusations against men on the campus themselves, other students, male students, and professors and so forth. But I think it's the thin edge of I saw the thin edge of the wedge. But
What was
it
The
gradually
Duke
grew.
University scandal? What was that? Maybe
Yeah,
15, 20 years ago, where they accused all these, I think, I forgot, football players, I think they were, or basketball players, that they
lacrosse
raped.
players.
Lacrosse, thank you. Yeah, so very preppy upper middle class type of sport. Wasn't like they were basketball players. There's class distinctions in playing sports at that age. Not many people understand that. But yeah, it was this huge. I mean, it was all over the news, and then it find out that it was all a lie, and no ramifications. I mean, I don't know whatever happened to the person that was making these accusations, but there seems to be no recourse for the accusers. Again, in other countries, if you were to make accusations and you were to, it was all of false pretenses. Your punishment was harsher than the actual perp, the alleged perp.
And it's that way with other crimes in the United States. I mean, false accusations are traditionally, as far as I know, were punished when it evolved. It was only with the advent of these gender feminism and these gender crimes that they seem to be immune from due process of law. And you look throughout the law, it's like this, whether it's the family courts are the worst, I think, but in these campus tribunals, and in that case, the Duke lacrosse case, that was a real criminal prosecution against these men. It wasn't just some campus tribunal. So I think, there's a good book by Marie Gottschalk who says that throughout American history, women's rights advocates have been the most authoritarian pressure group in American history. And I think that's true.
Yes. And also, Lamprey, I want to ask what you actually, no, what I want to get into here after that topic we just discussed is the globalization of sex, the push to, what I said here in the,
Oh,
kind of sarcastically, the push to idealize, tongue tied.
yeah. Don't say no more. I'll tell the doctor a great story. So while I was living in Cambodia, there were leaflets going around from the government, warning teenagers about Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is, I believe it's an American holiday. But because of social media, Cambodians learned about Valentine's Day. And because of the cultural differences, and they don't necessarily understand they don't understand romanticism is, this cold Shakespearean, I don't know, egalitarian, I don't know what you want to call it, but the teenage boys would just start raping girls. And the leaflets would go around saying this is an American culture, this is a Western concept, this is not Cambodian. You're misinterpreting the meaning of Valentine's Day and to not celebrate it. But social media, because of social media and Facebook and all of its all the various social media platforms, the Cambodian.
You there, Lamprey?
I'm still here.
Okay, wait, let me think. Is someone muted?
No, no, I'm here. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
yeah, for a moment I can hear you, but go ahead.
So, sorry, I don't know what you guys caught about that, but Valentine's Day being celebrated in Cambodia has it's become a major problem because of cultural differences, and young men are looking to take young girls' virginities away, and the government had to intervene on because of it.
I see. Thank you for pointing that out. I was not aware of that. And to go into the globalization of sex and trying to ideologize the entire world, what do you have to say about the NGOs, Dr. Baskerville, such as the UN and UNICEF, and what are they trying to do with this?
Well, these are among the greatest bastions of radical sexual ideology, especially feminism. I think, from what I've seen, United Nations functionaries do almost nothing else most of their day, but worry about, unfairness to women. They have hundreds of entities set up within the United Nations to deal with sexism and misogyny of various kinds, and it seems to be the main preoccupation of the UN. I mean, we think of the UN as an organization that's dedicated to world peace, but I think that's a tiny part, a small as the tip of the iceberg. I think the vast submerged part of the iceberg is all devoted to gender issues. They've had 6 UN conferences on gender, on women, which is more than any other topic. Um, it's just, a few years ago, they complained that there was no single, they consolidated all of the UN offices on women into one office, but then the other offices were allowed to continue also. So, yeah, it's unbelievable how much, and this is also true of the European Union to some extent and some other organizations. There's much less scrutiny. Who pays attention to what the United Nations does? I mean, nobody, there's a few Christian groups there at the United Nations who try to push against things like legalized abortion. And so far, they've prevented abortion from being recognized as a human right. And I think they've also prevented homosexuality from being recognized as a human right. But that's a tiny group of people. There's nobody pays attention to what the UN does. So they do all kinds of chicanery. They also think something similar is true of foreign policies of the United States, Britain foremost, but other countries as well. Most, when the feminists try to do something in domestic policy, there's a lot of constituencies that will look at it and scrutinize it and perhaps object to it, especially if it involves their bread and butter. But when it comes to foreign policy, who's paid attention to what's going on, what the State Department is doing, or the Defense Department, Pentagon, or the CIA, or what's going on in NATO, for example? Nobody pays attention to this. Very few people. So you can get away with an awful lot in foreign policy and international organizations and NGOs, so-called, that you can't get away with in domestic policy. And so it's become a favorite place for feminists and other sexual radicals to, to apply their trade.
Thank you.
And sorry, I should say, as Lamprey said, to peddle things in, especially in the global South and in countries where there's less resistance, there's not a lot of knowledge about this, what goes on. So there's a lot of work on, and the feminists, some of their favorite regions of the world are India and Africa, and Southeast Asia is another, where people are poor. They can't push back very easily. They don't have educations in the Western sense to know about, what this all means. And so it's pretty a free environment for them.
I see. Lamper, you have anything to say to that?
It's the globalization, neoliberalism. It's all about the individual and the individual hedonism. So the America is kind of the galvanizing force to push a lot of these UN policies with the backing of the US military and sanctions and all the various ways of, damaging a nation or a society to cut them off from the rest of the globalized world to push these ideologies. As they say, global homo. Well, feminism is a part of global homo. Surprisingly, I receive a lot of pushback from people when I talk about global homo and its various organs. Uh, Feminism being a major part of it, along with social media and different corporations. But the driving forces try to undermine whatever is not tangible. What's not tangible? The family unit, religion, morals, things like this. And what they're the kind of the crux of global homo is to make things much more tangible, to kind of tokenize every aspect of your society. Look what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, BlackRock is already foaming out of their mouth to get their mitts onto Ukraine now that the whole country's been hollowed out. What did they? What was the leak about? Over, I think 1.2 million Ukrainian men have died over there. Meanwhile, all the women have fled to Western nations or to be stabbed in Charlotte, North Carolina, which just happened the other day. So yeah, I got to witness a lot of this in the trenches while living in Southeast Asia. And NGOs are a huge part of it because NGOs don't necessarily abide by any type of government edicts. And they just take advantage of impoverished nations. They don't have these academic ways of trying to counter a lot of Western influences. And if the NGOs don't work, there's social media to back that up also to act as more of a battering ram, which is what I think is more or less what's happened over the past decade.
Yes, thank you for that. And with this topic of the globalization of sex, I want to touch upon this also because I believe that this is important. There are a lot of terms that are thrown around now, and I think they're thrown around in very dangerous ways because some of our terms, words of our language, and language supposed to have we're supposed to have clear definitions of what words mean. So you mentioned the terms in your book, Dr. Baskerville, of forced labor and sex trafficking, and also uh, what other terms I'm sure that Lamprey has probably seen or heard that are being thrown around these days, maybe you, Dr. Baskerville, are these terms of predator, pedophile, even the term pedophile, I don't even like saying the term, for men that are attracted to women, not children, for men that are attracted to women that are younger than them. Again, not children. They could be attracted to a 20-something-year-old woman, and because the man is older, he has the word pedophile thrown around about him. Now, I think that is something, my personal code. You can't just throw that word at someone. I'm sorry. Like, I don't care what's going through your brain. If we don't have proof of what's going on, and again, due process, like you keep on mentioning throughout your books, if we're going to have these terms thrown around, there has to be proof that someone is this horrible type of person, or that someone committed an actual crime with proof. So, with that going ahead, I've heard many times in the recent years the term sex trafficking. Now, I'm sure there is actual sex trafficking. There is actual sex slavery going back all throughout history. Simply the kidnapping of people to perform sex.
It's the
Uh,
new boogeyman.
right, right. But you see, you're spot on. Now, Dr. Baskerville, when you talked about the terms forced labor and sex trafficking, I mean, these words are thrown around. Also, they're thrown around for cultures that are not ours, the interference into other countries of what forced labor would be. I think that you even mentioned in your book, and tell me if I'm wrong, something like, I think there was one Middle Eastern country, it could have been Iran, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, where it was forced labor because they had the expectation that a woman would be tending to domestic duties such as cooking to be a wife or something, like as a requirement or something. I mean, is this forced labor or just something that we might expect from a partner? Or not we, maybe they over there in that part of the world are running things. Can you explain upon that?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. It's difficult to get a handle on this because there are a lot of horrible things that happen in the world. And I'm convinced there probably really is, slavery, involuntary servitude being
Yes.
conducted in parts of the world. And there is, forced labor, and there is, child labor, although even that's, how do you deal with? Well, I think these things need to be dealt with on their own terms, each one. They're different things. There's a difference between prostitution and child labor and slavery. And the, the genius, the brilliance of the feminists was they threw all these things together into one term, human trafficking. Human trafficking. And it became a grab bag for all kinds of things, some
Yep.
of which was horrible, truly horrible, but some of which was just ordinary traditional practices of poor societies, traditional societies, or non-feminist societies. And so by using this term, they threw everything together and they made everything sound like a crime. First of all, it's not a crime. There's no authority to adjudicate it. It's not really a crime, technically. I mean, crimes happen within sovereign states where there's a judiciary to adjudicate them. If they're happening internationally, technically they're not really even crimes at all, but they're horrible things, some of them. But some of them are not horrible things. Some of them are, as you say, there's a woman who's a girl who's raised to believe that she's going to be a mother and a wife, and we're especially in a society where she may have very little hope of being anything else, and where most women are quite content to be that. Is that forced labor? Is that well, that's what the feminists have done with this term human trafficking. And it gives enormous power to international organizations and NGOs like the UN, the European Union, the human rights organizations like Amnesty International and others, because they create hysteria around these things, many of which there's nothing we can do about. I mean, if you believe that slavery is taking place somewhere, and you really want to do something about it, send the Marines. Send the Marines and liberate the slaves. I mean, that's really what would have the greatest chance of doing it, if you really believe. But they don't want to do this. They just want to give more power to the United Nations to pretend to be doing something about it when they really can't do something. And, human trafficking, it's been shown, I mean, there's a lot of studies on this that have shown that a lot of human trafficking is simply consensual prostitution. It's consensual prostitution. If it's done by the man, if it's patronized by the woman, it's called, if it's from the standpoint of the prostitute, it's called sex work, and it needs to be legalized. And from the standpoint of the customer, the man, it's called human trafficking, and it needs to be punished.
Right.
And this is what you see this in Sweden, I believe, is my understanding of the law, is that it is legal to sell sex, but it is a crime to buy sex.
Yes.
Now, how does law work that way? You know, it's legal to sell something, but illegal to buy it. Um,
But let
and
me
of
build
course,
upon that further. It's the opposite when it comes to drugs. The drug dealer gets
exactly.
punished, but it's right. And then the drug dealer gets punished, but then the person doing the drugs, he's off the hook.
At least treated more leniently. Yeah, and
Right,
so
correct.
this is what they're trying to effect by the internationally by terms like human trafficking. They want to make sure that only the man is punished. The woman is engaged in sex work, but the man is part of human trafficking with him. So yeah, it's pretty crystal clear. And human trafficking is one that the conservatives have bought into, hook, line, and sinker. I mean, they're the ones peddling it, even though it was invented by the feminists. Uh, so it's just another example of collaboration by the right uh, with the feminist left.
Thank you both for those explanations. And Lambert, before we wrap up this subtopic, before we go to the final one, you had something to say here about dating apps with the globalization of sex?
I already kind of discussed that. Well, I had a poor connection. It was about dating apps becoming more prevalent in the world. Probably post COVID,
Yes.
uh, more countries are using these apps as a way of finding a significant other. But for now, it's mostly regulated to a secularized middle class American phenomenon.
Yes.
Again, a lot of this has to do with no, and everything the doctor is discussing with us today really comes down to no opposition to the bureaucratic state, government, and corporations. It used to be the church. The church is, I don't expect let's just say the Catholic Church to really stand another 40 or 50 years at most. They seem to be in it for money and real estate. The latest pope seems to be just another extension, another Pope Francis. Yeah, it's very unfortunate to see, or with the way the world's going, and you see the ongoing situation with AI, the hysteria about AI replacing jobs, and the financializing of the world economy helps prop up feminist. The most important crux of all this is that as long as we continue papering over the economy and giving jobs to people, women for that matter, promoting such ideology, whether it's in HR, whether it's in public assistance, you're not going to see an end to any of these things because it's all founded upon a lie, and the only way you can keep going on with the lie is extending that lie further and further until it has an endpoint. That endpoint being is when the economy actually kicks out from underneath it, or some type of war.
Yeah. I agree with that last point, actually. Yes. And to move on to our final topic before we come to a conclusion and possibly discuss some solutions to all this, is the sexualization of the military. And I think that this is important as well because I'm not sure how much people delve into this. And I think it's useful that we have, in this conversation, touched upon all facets of society that this phenomenon is creeping into. Now, we have the sexualization of the military, which you discussed in your book, The New Politics of Sex, Dr. Baskerville. Um, even the incentivization of divorce has creeped its way into the military and other things that make our military weaker, such as you said in your conclusion, people having sex instead of focusing on combat, the decrease in recruitment of men into the military, and that this is a pretty much has to be a patriarchal institution to have a proper national defense. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think a lot of it is self-evident. I mean,
Yes.
you admit women into the military and homosexuals into the military. I mean, what is the effect that's going to have on solidarity, on morale, on unit cohesiveness, on fighting power? I mean, it's pretty obvious. There's actually a couple of good books on this that I rely on for my book. Brian Mitchell's book, Martin van Crevel has written, a number of them a number of historians, commentators have written about this. Elaine Donnelly at the Center for Military Readiness has written some academic articles and other literature. It shows unmistakably, I mean, it's irrefutable, that the military is being whittled away to nothing. The one thing that is less obvious, a couple of things that are less obvious, how far the military has become a giant welfare state, is where because after all, you have to pay benefits not only to fighting men but to their families. If you're going to deploy men overseas, that's what you
Now
have to do.
women with children.
Right now, instead, it becomes a magnet for single mothers.
Yeah.
If you could admit women to the military, why not admit single mothers? And and the benefits that go to were intended for the families of fighting men, effective fighting men, go to single mothers now who don't have any essential military role at all. And you get the proliferation of clerks and lawyers. The military is full of, I think, the highest recruiting sector in the military right now is not soldiers, but lawyers. You get this proliferation of sexual harassment charges with, the famous tailhook scandal, where men are driven out of the military. Perhaps the most scandalous of all and least known of all, is the victimization of men, soldiers, for child support arrears. As in the welfare state, right? Which I said the military is a giant welfare state. Well, men deployed overseas on reduced pay are then divorced, and child support orders are entered against them in absentia when they're not present to defend themselves. They come back from the deployment, but they step off the plane or the boat, and what happens? They're arrested for child support arrearages for having served their country. I mean, this is madness. And do we hear a word about this in the media? No, not a bit. So, the military is one of the greatest institutions that suffered from feminization and from, I guess, effeminism is the right word.
Yeah, you even pointed out in your book, if I recall correctly, that some of these men in the military are, let's say, do not have the enthusiasm for this kind of work, because if their superiors are not willing to sacrifice their lives, why should they sacrifice their lives? I think you pointed out in your book, actually, which is a good point.
Yeah.
And you even mentioned are there romantic getaways for women in these? Go ahead.
I don't know. Apparently, this was something that was one solution that was mooted for the recruitment crisis, because the military is having such a difficult time to recruit men and to keep men into the military. So apparently, they had considered setting up romantic getaways for soldiers, married soldiers.
Oh, I see. Okay. This sounds very topsy-turvy considering the seriousness of the military. And
Yeah.
In conclusion, I mean, if we really wanted to delve into this, we could be here till next weekend. All kinds of things are happening that are, as we discussed, it's affecting society. And being that this is a so-called male space, we're focused on men's issues. All these are affecting men greatly. And as you one time said, I think in a previous interview with someone else, that men are in serious trouble, and I agree with that. I mean, the conclusions of all this, when you think of all the seriousness of all these areas of life that have been altered for the worst, what should we do? I mean, as we said before, the law has to come first, and the culture is downward from the law. And some people were opposing you on X, I saw before. I think Better Bachelor, he's fond of your work, but I think that he was saying that the culture has to come first, or this culture is as important as the law. But what can we do? It seems like whether it's dating, the law, the family unit, the military, all the things that we've been discussing here, it seems so monumental that I don't know what we should do. I mean, Lamprey, Dr. Baskerville, do you two have any input on things? It's going to take a long time to correct this, I believe, maybe decades. I might not even be alive by the time these things are corrected. So should we just keep on spreading the word? What should we do? What do you two think?
Well, some solutions are obvious. Excuse me. I mean, as you said, you have to respect the Constitution and the law and due process of law. And you have to allow people freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and things like punishing false accusations and a presumption of innocence. I mean, these are basic American values. They shouldn't have to be argued for. There shouldn't be any discussion about them. And yet what you find in the feminist movement is they're looking for all kinds of ways of criminalizing innocent people and eroding due process of law and eroding basic bedrock freedoms like freedom of speech and expression and the right to a fair trial and so forth. So I think that's a no-brainer. I don't think there should be any discussion about that, although there should be awareness that these things are taking place because there isn't right now. Someone like Tucker Carlson goes on the air and he talks a lot about basic American values like the First Amendment and freedom of expression, but not a word about how these things are being eroded in America. Secondly, you did mention a huge number of, and there are a huge number of issues of unfairnesses, injustices against men in the law and in the culture. I personally believe, well, Dr. Ananias suggests, and I think he's right about this, that behind almost all of this is feminism, is ideology. There's also some pecuniary interests and so forth, some profiteering. But what allows the profiteering is basically ideology. And if you break the back of feminism, you can break the back of a lot of these injustices. You can rectify them much more easily. He believes that the basic one thing that I think if you had to do one thing that would cut the Gordian knot of feminism, it would be the system of child custody and no fault divorce and the system of mother custody. Mother custody is the as the poet said, the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. And I think if there is one abuse that the feminists won without firing a shot, most people don't even know that it was the feminists who brought it in. It was no fault divorce and the presumption of mother custody over children. I think if you had a presumption of father custody over children and abolition of no fault divorce, which after all is a contradiction. No fault justice is a contradiction in terms. You cannot have no fault justice. No fault justice is a prescription for injustice, systematic injustice. No legal system can possibly work on the basis of no fault justice without complete nihilism and chaos. So you abolish no fault justice, you bring in a presumption of father custody, and I think you find that the feminist movement would have a lot of its power undermined very quickly if you enforce it.
Thank you for that, Lamprey. Go ahead.
I
can't prove that. I just want to say I cannot prove that. I've been invited onto a show later on, I hope in a few weeks, with Tom Golden and William Collins, the author of a good book on all this, where I'm going to be expected to prove that, but it'll be difficult.
Okay.
Do you have any? Is there any latest books you are working on?
I'm working on a few, but they're not in any kind of shape right now to.
Okay.
I'd like to distill some of the bits on gender issues from Who Lost America. So that might be something I'd like to come out with soon.
And as far as my 2 cents on how do you solve the problem, I for women it's stemming from colleges. That's it. I think the colleges are just absolutely taking a wrecking ball to women's minds, and it doesn't seem like fathers and mothers, for that matter, are willing to not send them to college. It's a pipeline. It's an absolute pipeline. They could go to, they can be growing up in a nice, moderate, white suburban. Uh, you name it, the Joneses suburban wet dream. And as soon as they step foot into a college and they're taking, it doesn't even matter what they're taking, they just come out completely radicalized. And there's no one doing the damage, despite, learning more, maturing, and ingrained in them when they went to college. There's no de-brainwashing them, unfortunately. Uh, and you have to, I think parents have to acknowledge that their daughters are not sons. That's the other one. I think fathers have, whether they're upset that they had a daughter, the chink in the armor, not acknowledging the sexual differences between uh, their children. And yeah, I just go, it kind of just boils back to just you need, I know it's uncomfortable, but yes, but you also have to, you have to acknowledge the fact that sending her to college to wind up getting a six-figure job so she can be independent of men is not a winning strategy for your daughter or for you.
Yes. Thank you for this great conversation, both of you.